anyways, I should start again. Hello, my name is Willow McMurray. This class is the Lake Pigment class. And as I just mentioned, any dyer ends up with a whole yard full of jars of really good dyes that they haven't quite used up and they don't want to get rid of. Let me make sure that I hit OK on this. And so this is a way to reuse those pigments, to not lose all that good dye. Lost my screen.
Just a minute. I just moved it to screen 2, so you'll stop getting notifications of people coming into the session. There we go.
There we go. Okay, so lost my train of thought. Where was I at? Anyways, what we have today is I'm going to go over basically how you turn any leftover dye into a pigment. Now, when I say that, not all dyes produce pigments. There are some out there which you try and you don't get anything, but a lot of them do. And you find examples of that in different treatises on how to make paints and how to make lake pigments. They'll talk about different types, and some that we don't know. There's the elusive lake yellow that nobody can identify. So let's see, next page, please. So what you need is you need some leftover dyes. And as I mentioned, it's really a good idea to get a hold of those pigments before the labels have fallen off. I'm going to have one here that's cochineal and one that I thought was madder, but now I think might be lac because the label fell off. So you need that leftover dyes. You also need to have alum. I see I have alum twice in there. Oh well. Washing soda, or there's some examples of potash being used. Basically, it's an alkaline. And then coffee filters. Those are the supplies that you use up. And then more jars than you think. I say 2 quart jars, but really you're going to need multiple. So it's honey, grab me one more. I really recommend when you get to later stages to find some tall, slim jars. Olive jars work really well, for example. And then you need I say an eyedropper, but really a turkey baster. Okay, so let's see, that's the basic supplies that you need to start off with. It's not a whole lot. It's not very complicated, unlike a lot of other things in this world. Can we go to the extraction process? I'm going to talk this through, and then I'm going to show you how it's actually done. We're going to actually jump over and we're going to do a little bit. So next page, please. Okay, so the extraction process, again, you acquire your jar of dye, and then you do some filtering. So you can warm it up to dissolve it and filter it out. Basically, you get all the chunky bits out of it, and you get down to just the liquid that has the pigment in it. And then you dissolve your alum and your washing soda or your potash in warm water. In theory, you could throw the alum or the potash directly in, but it'll tend to bind around the molecule. So dissolving it's how you spread it out and get a more even result. And then warm water is just that makes it dissolve better. Okay, so if you can jump to my my screen, or
we'll stop the ship. There we go.
Okay, I'm gonna make myself big so I can make sure that I'm showing what I need to. Oh, no, that didn't work. Let's see, right now it looks like you're pinned, at least on mine.
I pinned you.
Okay, well, it's small on mine for some reason. I don't know why. It's not letting me do my pinning. Okay, no worries. I'll just assume it looks good. Okay, so I've got 2 jars here. This one is cochineal, and it was super thick, sludgy stuff. It's still super thick and sludgy. I filtered out. You didn't, just be glad you didn't see that. There was much wiping of counters. I really recommend, if you do this, do it outside, not in a new house kitchen. And this is the mystery one that I think is probably lac. It looks a little brown for that though, so you know, it looks like lac to me. I'm not certain what it is. It doesn't smell like lac so much. Anyway, so we got these 2 jars. Then you start with alum, just the same type of alum you use for dyeing. I tend to use the dyer's alum, not the cooking alum, not because it seems to be any better, but because it's cheaper to buy in bulk. And then washing soda or soda ash, same thing. Took me years to figure out why they kept on calling them by different names. Or you can use potash. Same idea. What you're doing is when you put the alum in, you're binding the pigment, making it sticky. And then when you put the alkaline, the soda ash or the potash in, it makes it heavy and it binds to that and it drops. Now the potash or the soda ash, those are whitening agents. So they make the pigment lighter. I think that's why potash was sometimes used. I don't think it makes it quite as light, a little bit less calcium in there, a little less chalk that shows up in the end result. But I've been doing it with washing soda, so we're going to stick to that process today. So I've got this like a cooking show. I'm going to put these off to the side. And I pulled just a little bit into a very large jar. This looks like an extremely ridiculous amount, but you'll see why I did that. This one I've already discovered is a little more well-behaved. And I do have a containment device at the bottom because it can sometimes be exciting results. So you take your alum and you dissolve it. So this is alum that's been dissolved in water. This one I did about 4 ounces in. And you first get it sticky with alum. You can do it either way, actually. You could start with washing soda, but the alum gives you a little more control, I think, if you start with that. So just pour it in. I'm going to do about half the jar. Actually, I'm going to do 3/4 of the jar in this one because I know this one takes a lot more alum. And we'll look at some recipes in a bit, and I'll show you why you need sometimes more. Depends on the dye and on how thick it was. Okay, and that one might get some chunky bits. So I start with that, and actually I jump to the next step here, looking at it. And that's that first step. So this is basically, so if they used alum and a metamordant, if they use the alum in the dye, if so, you may be able to skip this step or add less. That's really important to know. Actually, let's jump back real fast and let's look at some of the recipes. I think that's the next slide.
Okay, just a second.
You said you wanted to do this.
Yep, just a minute. I'm going to share right now. Give me a minute.
And these recipes, these weren't actually from some of the treatises. There's some other folk have done as redactions for some of the different treatises.
There we go.
I see. So that's an extraction one, and the next one should be blue. It has recipes. Yes. So here's some different recipes. Here's one that uses buckthorn lake, for instance. That's the buckthorn berries. And once you get done dyeing with them, you take the leftover pig dye, and it says it uses 1 part alum to 1 part washing soda. So there's an equal amount. If you notice on the carmine, that's Cushing. We're going to do that one. It has alum and washing soda. It threw a little cream of tartar in. That is a pH adjustment for if you want more purple or more pink. You can do pH adjustments in it sometimes. You'll end up being alkaline no matter what you do. So if you want something that only shows up, the colors only shows up if it's highly acidic, you're not going to get it. It's really hard to get a red or an orange matter because that likes to be acidic, for instance. But it uses 8 to 5 alum to washing soda. Mine's actually stronger. Mine uses 4 times alum to 1 part washing soda. And then there's 2 others. Rose madder was a favorite pigment to get. Madder was a sort of difficult dye to extract in the first place. You get it extracted, it's sitting around. Nobody wants to waste it after all that work grinding up those roots. So that was one that there are lots of treatises on how to get rose madder. It was just something that was highly available. So I've got 2 different recipes. If you get the handout, you can play around with these and see how they work. If you notice, one of them starts with the dye water, and one of them starts with fresh madder. They just made pigments. They didn't even start from the dyer's point of view. So they They did the process that we use to get all the color out of the matter. And then they added the alum and then potassium carbonate. So that one actually used potash. So those are some examples for you for recipes. My experience is if you get a random dye jar, they are guidance. In the long term, you just have to keep throwing alum and washing soda at something until they get. So I've got a little bit of background noise today. It's a wonderful thing to have children in the house. All right. No worries. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go to lake process. If you want to go to the next page. That's when I realized I was getting a little ahead of myself. We start with the alum solution. We're going to pour the washing soda in next. And this is where you want to see. It says it should start to violently fizz or solidify and precipitate. You will see whether I think I've got one that does the violent volcano and one that's a little quieter in its precipitation. We'll find out. Every day is different. And then because you have to let it sit for a couple of hours, I have a cooking show set up where I have the next step already prepped for you to see. So that's what we're going to do next. So if you want to jump back to the screen, I want to make sure I went through that before I started pouring. There. Okay. And let's move the coffee cup out of the way. Do not drink your dye stuff. Okay. So I got these, I just poured the alum in them. And we're about to add the washing soda. And my washing soda looks like it is there's a little bit of mixing. I made it last night. I didn't reheat it this morning. So a little remixing. We take the washing soda and let's start with the one that I think would be less obnoxious. So hopefully everybody can see this. Is that good for the screen? Okay. And you should be able to see it's starting to do this weird precipitation thing. Let's see if I can pour while holding. And the tricky part is to figure out when it's right. Usually what happens is suddenly it'll go kaboom and start falling. Kaboom being relative. Everything will stop going up and it'll start going down. Wow, it's winning a lot. I think I'm just on the edge. Oh, you teaser. We're going to see. Now you see why you want such a big jar. I'm going to give it a moment because I don't want to put too much in. So I've got about half a jar. Okay, so it started to do this and it will start looking like it's falling down, like it's like a rainfall. So that's what you do in that one. Let's see what this other one does. I'm going to give the last of this washing soda. Let's see if I gave enough alum this time. And what you can do is you can throw a little more alum in if you need to precipitate it some more. Okay. Oh, already you can see it's starting to grow and grow and grow. That was for just a little bit. But that's just why you have a containment system when you do this. So grab a little more washing soda. Oh, there's a good lid on it, shake it up. Because we are probably going to volcano this one out. It's still going up in both cases. And that's where you follow the recipe and you discover maybe it needs a bit more alum. I think in both cases. So I'm going to throw a little more alum in the first one. See if I can get it to go to that. Okay. Yeah. So that's close to the camera that you can see it's starting to do a fall. It's starting to fall down as well as up. And that's what you're aiming for. We'll give it some time. This one, I don't want to take this out. Yeah, this way you contain it. It does that. Ooh, no, strong. It's ridiculous, isn't it? The fun that you can have. Okay. So that's how you precipitate them. And then you let them sit. And if you come back and it doesn't look like it's separated enough, you do this again. So you give it a couple of hours. And after a couple of hours, it goes to, it separates like this. And that's what you're trying to get to, is that separation where you can see that the dye stuff and the, let me see. Yeah, this is the one I've got separated. The other one I moved on to the next step. You have some foam at the top sometimes. That foam is not important. But what's important is that this part has come out. You can grab that and try to do a second extraction. My experience is the first extraction, you'll get a lot of pigment. Second extraction, you get just a little bit. Maybe it's worth it, maybe not. If I was working with Tyrian purple, I'd do it, but otherwise I've said it's not worth my effort. And then third extraction, nothing. It's not worth doing a third time. So I can recover that. But the next step is the rinse process. I've got it on the screen, but I'm just going to talk through it. What you do is you grab your turkey baster, which I put down. You can do an eyedropper, but I really recommend one of these guys. And remember I said you need many, many jars. So honey, I need one more jar. But you try not to add oxygen to it. You're going to pull it off and pour it out. And for time's sake, I'm going to be very carefully see if I can just pour the top off of here and get closer. You try to get as much of this top layer off as possible. So I pour until I start getting a significant amount of dye. And now I've got just a thin layer left on top that I still want to remove. I'll see if I can grab some of this foam too. Yeah, or not. And I'm getting a lot of color in the base, so I'm going to stop there and call that good enough. So at this point, it's ready for its first rinse. And the first rinse, you just take water, a pitcher of water here, and you fill it up. And the more water you can put in the jar, the better. So if it's really, really full, it's harder to do big rinses. There's a spoon. I'm going to give it a little mix just to make sure it all gets well rinsed down to the bottom. This is why you want to pre-filter, because otherwise you're going to have little bits of who knows what, bits of leaf or whatever else the dye are left in there in your dye. Okay, so at that point, you have to let this sit for a couple of hours, maybe overnight, for it to separate. And once you do that, I did this one this morning, and I started the separation, and it's not a whole lot. The other trick is to pour it into those olive jars. This one doesn't show a lot, but let me show you the one that sat overnight. This one sat overnight, and you can see the olive jars are taller, so they give you really good separation. It makes it easier to pour off or to baste off that top layer. As I said, I'm not going to reuse this, so I'm going to pour that. So this is rinse one. And I can baste the last little bit off. So some more. And you can get really particular about this, but it is going to go through multiple rinses. The more rinses you do, the better. At some point you say, that's enough. I'm going to go on no matter what. So this one here, this is rinse one. And you basically just add more water to it. And let it sit for a couple of days. You can decide that you want to, you can decide that you want them to go to smaller and smaller jars. Smaller jars give you better separation. This is a smaller jar. And now I'm getting down to that last bit of pigment in there. And it makes it much easier to pour or baste off that last bit. So I'm getting it clear. So this was after 2 rinses. And I'm starting to get down there to some really good clear pigment. I could do 3, 4 rinses, but around 2 or 3, that's 2 or 3 days worth of work and I'm done. I'm ready to go on and go to the next step. So that's the rinse process, the drying process. So to dry your pigment so that it's ready to be used, You basically need a jar, a funnel, and a coffee filter, or a piece of cheesecloth would work as well. Although it's harder to get the pigment out, you want something fairly fine so you can scrape the pigment off and not get any wasted in the fiber. And that's where you take, I'm just going to use that last jar, that had 2 rinses already. And you pour it in, and you should be getting very little color coming out because all the pigment is now going to be captured in there. This is just like a cooking show. See, that's what happens after overnight, a couple of hours. You get down to that, and you end up with a coffee filter that has this pigment in it. You still have to finish drying, but it's damp. And the best way to dry it is to, out of camera reach, is to lay it out on a porous material like a brick. And that brick will help evaporate out the water until it's perfectly dry. So you just lay it out, lay it in the sun, make sure that there's no wind. It will run away from you. That has happened before. I've had to chase my pigments across the ground. And you end up, in the end, I think it is left, with dried pigment that is ready for the next step. And this class was a lot faster than I expected it to. Before it's taken hours to do this, but we've waited. So at this point, is there any questions? Do you want me to keep on working on these and showing you the process?
I put it in the chat, but is there a kind of average number of rinses?
I usually do a minimum of 2. I do 2. I talk about doing 3, and I get bored because I'm a dyer and I want to just pass the pigment on. An avid painter might say, "Oh, I want pure pigment. I'm going to do more rinses." But it takes about a day per rinse for it to filter, to start settling. I mean, you see this starting to settle a little bit on the one here, but it just takes a long time. So at some point you say, "That does it. I just want to go on." And the less washing soda you can do, the better. It produces a lighter color if you put more washing soda in. And the hard part is you look at that leftover. This is the stuff I'm going to throw out. And it looks like there's great pigment in there, but really you don't get a whole lot out of that. Right. You saw the first one. Second one, you can barely scrape off the paper. And this is the pigment that you then use when you read about lake pigments. These are lake pigments that were used. I did it with red pinked ones, but there are a lot of yellow lake pigments. They cannot identify what they are usually. They're guessing whenever they see a yellow lake. I think the Book of Kells has a number of yellow lake pigments in it, for instance. What's that model book? The Godium model book, I think, also talks about a yellow lake pigment because they actually tell you how to make it. They might use buckthorn for that. Oh, that'd be the green one. Buckthorn makes it green. Madder makes that rosy color. Lac gives you a little more of a purpley color. I've gotten some browns out of Kutch. Indigo, you can do the lake process with, but usually if you get the indigo extract, it is already a pigment. You're just redoing the process that you started with. So you can recover it, but it's usually better just to use the pigment straight for indigo. Unless you're doing a woad or something where you're starting with the ball, in which case you may need to do this extraction.
So I just got here, but I have a question.
Sure.
When you say lake pigments, are these pigments that you would find near and around a lake? Or have I completely misunderstood?
Yeah, it's called a lake pigment because of the way that you're extracting. These are dyes. They are used for dyeing that are then extracted by making of sticky, because by using alum. Alum, actually, when you add it into a dye stuff, it makes it sticky. It makes it glob up, which is why you often first mordant your cloth in alum, then you rinse it, and then you put it into the dye bath, because if you don't rinse it well enough, it'll tend to make all the dye stuff glob up, and it may not actually go into your cloth as well. so that you put alum in here to make it all sticky, and then you put the precipitate, the washing soda or potash, into it to make it fall. That also gives it a whitening effect, where it gives it a background color, so you can see the pigment color better. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not sure who started calling them lake pigments. But yeah, it has nothing to do with being near a lake. It's more the washing and the rinsing. So has anybody tried working with lake pigments before?
I
Actually using them.
I have painted with them. I have never made them.
One of the things that you end up with when you have that raw pigment, I have no idea where I put it. Not there. When you end up with the raw pigment, is sometimes it needs to be molded a bit. I've had some that turn out rather granular. Sometimes it's too much. And that's something that you just have to have experience with, whether you need to actually grind it up. And I think the yellows actually usually need a little bit more molding. I've had some granular greens and yellows before. Rose madder is well behaved. It's probably why everybody likes it. Okay. As you can see, you're seeing a separation. Oh, I've got a question from inside the room. Yes, Eva, you come over here on the picture if you want. Well, you have to be around all this stuff. But
Are there any dye stuffs that this will not work with?
there are some. Try which ones I've tried before. Well gives you one. Actually, one of my favorite ones that does work. I remember the ones that do work. It's a local dye stuff. It's called Thelosperma, or green thread. It was a surprise that it did work. Usually grasses and things like that, you would think, well, it wouldn't work, but it actually does sometimes. Some of the local ones, the native dyes, do not develop as much of a pigment. And when you try it, you end up with nothing. You dry it, you do all the work, you dry it out, and you end up with a coffee filter. So it's one of the things you experience the hard way. I think I've tried it with which one was it? Some of the local flowers. Some of the local flowers just didn't give me anything, which was sad because we had gorgeous colors out of it. Sorry, I can't give you an exact list because those are the ones I don't think about because they didn't do anything.
I think there's a question in the chat. Other than the whitening effect of the washing soda, are there other considerations for impact on final pigment color?
There is a pH adjustment. In one of the recipes that is in my handout, they actually add a little bit of cream of tartar to bring it to slightly more to the acidic side, because this tends to be very alkaline. So as I said earlier, if you have a dye stuff that has a color you want, but that color only shows up in the acidic range, for instance, madder. If you want an orange, really orangey madder color, you're not going to get it. Madder always goes rose, pink, reddish. Because the madder or the orange you only get when it's acidic. You can bring it over a little bit using cream of tartar or maybe a little bit of vinegar, but you have to precipitate it on a alkaline.
Right.
Are there any other questions in the chat? Yeah, I see the thumbs up.
And just for participants, just if you haven't looked at the chat, the handout is there now, the slide.
Let's pull up the
for
references.
those of us who are on mobile, we can't access, we can see the chat, but we can't save it. Can we put an email in and have somebody send it to us?
Actually, can you pull up my last two slides?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that.
Skip the drying process because I was showing it to you, but I have a slide that has some resources for you. These are where I got some of the information. I got from natural colorants, and then I did some online work. I I should have gone back to Theophilus and done some Theophilus digging. They talk a little bit about lake pigments, but they don't really give you the details you need. Oh, drying, and next one,
Resources.
resources.
Awesome.
And fiber resources, because people ask where to get them from. Actually, well, in the next class, I'll talk about where you can get pigments so you don't have to go through this process to get pigments in the first place. And on the, yeah, so there's some of the resources. There's actually a really good long WordPress post on how to make lake pigments that I used as my starting source with good comments. If you go to the last page, it has my email address. Feel free to reach out to me.
Perfect.
It's Willow MacM, or Willow spelled with a C, WILLOC, macm@gmail.com. And I'd love to know some of the experiences folks have working with the actual lake pigments. And yes, this was a shorter class than I expected. Last time I tried to do this, I didn't have it set up as a cooking class though. It took, well, 2 hours, so. You don't always know what your dyes are going to do until you try them. You don't know if they're going to volcano or if you're going to sit there and pour a little more washing soda back and forth. So I did that prep work for you.
Well, the volcano itself was worth it. Just watching the volcano go.
Very exciting. That's why I said make sure you've got your containment system figured out ahead of time. You think, oh, I've got a huge jar, a little bit of dye. Bad. Oh yeah. And this will actually give me maybe a tablespoon of pigment.
Right.
Okay,
All right.
does anyone else have any questions? Or I have a fantastic thank you in the chat.
Thank you. Yes.
And I did
Right.
put Willow's email address as well in the chat, just in case anyone wanted to grab it from there and didn't want to wait
Awesome.
for the video or didn't want to open up the presentation, but it's there as well.
And if you want to know what to do with the lake pigment after you've got it made, that's what my next class is going to be about. And I can do a master preset here. We'll go through mulling it and mixing it into a glare.
Very, very cool. Well,
Right.
if we're all set, I'm going to stop the recording. And I think thank you so much for this class and the great demonstrations and the visuals. I love how you had everything prepped. This is great. And I think the handout is terrific too. So thank you so much for volunteering to teach. And I will hopefully wait for the recording for the next class. I'm an illuminator myself. So I definitely am interested in the glare, but I'm off moderating somebody else on the next session. So yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome. And remember to befriend your dyers if you're an illuminator.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.